So we had not.
How is everybody? My voice is like going the absolute like wrong direction. I don't know why. It's, I don't feel sick, but I feel like I can't stop. I don't know. My voice has been super scratchy. I've been coughing all day, so I'm gonna stay way back here. And wish me luck. I mean, I'm gonna do the best that I can. We actually are gonna start a part of a group activity today, so that'll help a little bit. But bear with me. I'll do the best I can, and if I keep coughing, then we'll go with it. So sorry, I sound so awful. Right? My kids are like, you sound awful. Thanks, I love you too. but hopefully it'll go away. But I want to remind you of a couple of things. This is the big one, right? This is due tonight, right? So quite a few of you have already submitted it, but just to remind you, the final paper is due by tonight at 11:59 p.m. It's worth 100 points. You're turning it in on Canvas, so please make sure that you get that in. If you don't turn it in before the deadline, you can obviously email it to me. It's 10% off per day, so better to do it sooner rather than later, but better late than not at all. So try and get that to me tonight, by tonight on Canvas. Don't forget our third exams can be done. Right, 1 week from today, today and Monday. And that's it. I'm starting to get sad, really, but legitimately, like it's almost over. It's exciting, but it's sad, right? So our exam is next week. The paper is due tonight. Are there any questions about either of those things? Well, so we're not meeting during finals week. So I have family that's coming in on the day of our final, so I'll be here. But I was trying to make it where we didn't have a final on finals on the final day, right? So I'll be here if you want to come meet with me. But yeah, we there's technically a finals week after.
How bad is it? You know, how many of them absolutely stake in that summer? What percent?
All of them, they're all.
Beautiful.
I actually really enjoy reading these papers, and very rarely are they not well done. Like I actually think that they're pretty fun to read as far as papers go. I would much rather read these than some of the like other ones. Yeah, it's super interesting. Oftentimes people recommend movies or shows that I haven't seen, and I love that because I'm a huge fan of watching shows. I just finished Wednesday. That was fun. I love this. Right, my daughter is like obsessed with it. It was really good. Yeah, everybody, the dance, right? Her awkward dance, right, is all over TikTok. So really fun. And I started some weird one last night, 1899. If anyone's watched that, super. It's strange. I've got all sorts of theories. I'm only on episode 2 of all sorts of things. So, but normally I actually really enjoy reading these. So it's pretty.
Like your mom said she likes your drawing. At some level, you do your drawing stuff.
No, I mean, I have nothing to benefit from that. That's so sad, right? That's so sad. No, I look forward to it. So I look forward to it. All right. So we left off here. Where we were talking about all the different neurocognitive disorders, Alzheimer's being the most common one. A little bit of treatment and intervention. And I mentioned this last time, these disorders don't have a cure. Though really interesting, I actually read a journal article this morning about a trial on an Alzheimer's drug that they're trying to push through. It led to 43% reduction in the symptoms of Alzheimer's. but it also caused some pretty significant side effects like internal bleeding and hemorrhages in the brain. So it's interesting though, it like is going to the next stage of trials. So as I said, there's constant research being done on this. I literally read it this morning when I woke up, it was on my newsfeed. But there's a lot of research being done that you can do things like testing. You can actually go and get tested to see if you're going to be more vulnerable to get some of these diseases that we're talking about. Now, far from perfect, but you take these tests and they might give you a false positive or a false negative. But there are some ways to kind of screen. And if you are more vulnerable to potentially getting one of these types of neurocognitive disorders, what it means is you can take better preventative measures, right? So there's a lot of focus on like early intervention, right? Like trying to work on your diet and your lifestyle choices and things that are going to make a big impact on preventing. But the treatments for these diseases or these disorders that we're talking about are really only moderately helpful. What they do is they slow the progression. So there's a lot of medications that people can take that work on acetylcholine and dopamine, and they're helpful in the early stages of the disease, especially like Alzheimer's, for example. But when people get a little bit later into the progression of the disease, it doesn't work anymore. So they're typically taken for a matter of years, and then people hit a point where they're no longer effective and they go off of them. But what they do is they prevent some of the breakdown of acetylcholine and dopamine, which does play a role in the progression of Alzheimer's. These things have gained a lot of popularity since the ban on stem cell research was lifted back in 2009, I believe it was. It's giving us an opportunity to do more research on this. There's a lot, as I said, it's just something that is just constantly being studied. I found a really interesting video is from last year that was talking about a new method looking at trying to give people like a nasal spray that is trying to work on reducing some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's. There's also a lot of research being done about diet related to insulin. So it's almost thought there's like a type 3 diabetes that makes you more vulnerable to things like dementia. So let me play part of this video for you. I'm not going to play the whole thing. And it's kind of at a higher level, but we talked about those plaques and tangles last time, so hopefully they're a little familiar. But I think it's a nice introduction and again, kind of giving some hope to this idea that that drug is actually, or that study is actually in progressing through trials. So it's just stuff like that constantly, right? Like how can we use the body's immune system? How can we use the idea of like insulin? How can we use all these different elements to try and hopefully treat it? And a lot of that stem cell research that's been done and a lot of like just general research like that has helped us to get closer. So we're definitely on like the verge of something, hopefully, and then in the near future, that will help us to treat this better. But for now, the treatments are really moderate at best. And there are, as I said, a lot of things you can do to prevent or delay. I won't say that you can delay it inevitably, but you can significantly delay the onset of Alzheimer's by some of the choices that you make related to your health. Right. And so we often talk about like the pillars of a brain healthy lifestyle. And most of the time, these are things that we know we're supposed to do. Right. Like we know we're supposed to exercise and eat healthy and get good sleep and all that stuff. Easy to say, not the easiest to do. But these are some of the things that tend to correlate with delaying or preventing Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of research on this. And these are things that hopefully everyone, does, especially as we get older in life. But exercise. Exercise is a really big one. You increase blood flow and oxygenation when you exercise, not only in your body, but also in your brain, right? And so exercising has really positive correlates with health, both physically and mentally. Diet is a huge one. This is one that's probably gained the most awareness over the last few years, that diet plays a big role as a like a vulnerability factor with Alzheimer's. So eating smaller meals, eating across the rainbow, having green tea and certain types of like herbs and extracts, getting a lot of omega-3 acids, right? Avoiding trans fats and saturated fats, like over-processed sugars, right? So there's a lot of foods that are thought to be kind of negatively impacting our health in general, but also correlating with things like dementia and the neurocognitive disorders. Another big one, mental stimulation. Right. So pushing yourself, right, keeping mentally active by being in school, by reading, by, doing all sorts of things to kind of push yourself practicing the 5 W's. I always forget what these are. I wrote them down. The who, what, where, when, and why, right? Like always kind of thinking through things. We tend to creatures of habit, right? How many of you drive or like walk the same path like every day when you're on your way to school or on your way to a class, you go the same route, right? I do. It's the most efficient one, right? Like get on the freeway, I take the same route, I get off at the same spot, everything the same every day. The more you can kind of change that up, you form new pathways in the brain, walk a different way to your next class, right? Go a different way home today, right? All those little things push your brain and form new pathways and new connections. Playing games. This is why I justify going to so many escape rooms, right? It's good for my mental stimulation. I'm at 98. I'm so close to the 100 mark, 98 escape rooms. But doing these things, learning something new by keeping your brain mentally active, getting good sleep. This is another big one. Your brain recharges and restores during sleep, right? So getting sleep, managing your stress, having a good active social life, all of these things, they're not magical cures, but they are going to help with some resiliency. They're going to help make your brain and your body healthier and stronger, which can definitely prevent or delay this for quite some time. So again, things to kind of focus on, and they're not things that maybe you can do every day, but whenever you can, it's a good idea to try and do them, right? Especially as you get older and your vulnerability to these things increases. There's lots of fun, lots of great like apps and games too. Like on your phone, there's a million like fun like apps and games that will push your brain and keep you active. I have a bunch of them on mine that I play all the time, like if I need like a 5-minute break. But there's all sorts of things that you can do. And these are some of the kind of common suggestions for delaying or preventing Alzheimer's. Any thoughts, questions, comments, anything else here with chapter 15 at all? All right. Our last chapter. Right? Oh my goodness. Can't believe it. The last chapter, right? Last set of slides. How many times can I say last today? I don't have to worry about it quite so much. It'll be worse. It'll be worse on Monday, I'm sure. But we'll look at this last chapter. It has to do with psychology and the law. Anyone in here considering potentially going into something with forensic psychology? Just even if it's a maybe, right? A couple of you? Any idea what you want to do? Yeah. You don't have to know, but just out of curiosity. Okay. But related to like psychology and the law or just more in general? You had your hand up too, not sure yet. And that's okay, right? You don't have to commit to anything yet. This tends to be a really interesting branch of psychology. You're looking at the intersections between psychology and the law. And there's 2 sides to this chapter, and we'll focus on the first one today and the other one next time. So there's psychology and how it affects the law, and then there's how the law affects psychology. So we'll look at both sides of the coin. But this whole chapter has to do with what we can call forensic psychology, the intersections between psychological practice and research, and also the judicial system, right? So if somebody commits a crime and they had a psychological like disorder, do they deserve to be treated and tried the same way as somebody who didn't have a disorder? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the disorder and it depends on the crime. If somebody's going to therapy, what are their rights, right? What are the ethical guidelines that therapist has to follow, right? What a really interesting class and topic that we'll talk a little bit more about next week. But what we'll focus on today is more how psychology affects the law, how psychology and disorders and our awareness of them can affect legal proceedings if somebody commits a crime. And there's a lot of really famous cases in here that we'll look at a little bit as well. So when somebody commits a crime, right, they oftentimes find that they're going to trial in some way, right? Obviously, it depends on the crime and it depends on a lot of different factors. But if somebody commits a crime, they might go to a legal proceeding. And so what we need to decide right off the bat is if somebody has a mental illness, do they deserve to go through a normal trial, or should they have extenuating circumstances? Should we consider a different verdict? And so that's where we get at in this chapter, things like not guilty by reason of insanity, what is insanity, criminal commitment, and so on. I love this. Mr. Evans, it's a speeding ticket. You can't play insanity, right? Insanity is something that is a really interesting concept and kind of really misunderstood. It's not a mental illness, right? If you're insane, it's not that you have a mental illness. It's a legal term. And it's an actually very complicated legal term that we'll talk a little bit more about. So if somebody is trying to argue that they were insane, right, at the time of committing a crime, what this means is that because of a mental disorder, they either did not know right from wrong, or they could not control an unresistible impulse to act. So maybe they weren't aware of what was right and wrong. Maybe they had voices telling them to do something or not do something. Maybe they don't know what's real and what isn't because of hallucinations. The most common types of disorders that lead to a verdict of insanity are things like schizophrenia. When people aren't in contact with reality, it makes it hard to appreciate the gravity of your actions. So if somebody has a mental illness like schizophrenia and they commit a crime, they typically aren't going to be tried the same way. That schizophrenia is going to be considered, and we might evaluate them for insanity. Right? And so what we end up with are a couple of different verdicts that people can try and go for, or maybe even be granted, that relate to this idea of insanity. And probably the one that people have heard of the most is not guilty by reason of insanity. Right? So if somebody pleads this, what they're saying is that at the time of committing a crime, they weren't able to appreciate right from wrong. They didn't know what was happening. They couldn't resist an uncontrollable impulse to act. And so they're saying that I should be found not guilty and not held to the same standards as somebody who doesn't have something like schizophrenia. Super controversial. And people try and fake this, but this verdict is actually granted very rarely, less than 1% of the time. And we'll talk about some famous cases. And even in those, like, this is a very uncommon verdict. And I'm not a lawyer. There's a lot of legality in this chapter, but we're looking at from the psychological side. Again, if somebody has this going on, right, then they should be considered or tried a little bit differently. So this is one verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. And again, you are not guilty. So if you are found not guilty by reason of insanity, you typically go to a mental hospital, and you might be there for years, right, until you are healthy enough, sane enough to be released back out into the world. Sometimes that never happens, and other times it happens in a matter of months or years or whatnot. One of the other verdicts, there's two other ones that are actually much more common. People can also be found guilty but mentally ill, right? Yes, you have a mental illness, but you are guilty of the crime that you committed, right? So you committed murder, and even though you have a mental illness, it wasn't enough for us to give you a different verdict. Someone who's guilty but mentally ill goes to jail, but they receive treatment in jail for the mental illness that they're struggling with. So guilty, but mentally ill. This one can also happen, guilty, but with a diminished capacity. So let's say somebody, again, murder, we'll go with them. Someone commits murder, right? And they are found guilty, but with a diminished capacity. Yes, you have a mental illness, and we're going to take that into account. So instead of convicting you of like first-degree murder, we'll convict you of manslaughter. So you get a lesser sentence because you had a diminished capacity, because you weren't in your right mind, but you're still found guilty. You still go to jail, just typically for a little bit lesser amount of time. The other thing that can sometimes happen is between the crime and like the trial, people can have something happen. A psychotic break, maybe the crime itself is what caused them to have a little bit of a snap, and they can be found mentally incompetent to stand trial. So now that you're about to go to trial, if you're not able to prepare an adequate defense, or you can't understand the charges being brought up against you, we might send you to an institution to help you get better, and then you would stand trial, right? And this happens sometimes. People will be, maybe it's their medication, maybe it's something about the crime. They'll go to a psychiatric hospital, and they'll stay there. They'll get their medications under control. They'll receive therapy. And if they ever become mentally competent, then they would go through trial like normal. Sometimes people spend their whole life never achieving competence enough to be released and go to trial. But these are some of the verdicts that people can have where we're taking their mental health into consideration. And again, the one that's probably most famous is this one, that not guilty by reason of insanity. But the ones on this slide are much more common. It's much more common that people are found guilty, but at a lesser level, or just go to jail and receive treatment, or maybe you need some help before you stand trial. Any thoughts or questions or anything before we look at some cases that involve these verdicts? Anything for the moment? Anyone in here really interested in serial killers? Right? You put your hand up quickly. You're like, yes, right. Several of you, super fascinating, super terrifying. So many great documentaries on like Netflix right now related to that. I haven't watched the new one, the Dahmer one. Everyone keeps telling me it's super disturbing, but I haven't watched it yet. But let's look at some of these cases. So I have a bunch of people up here. And this is a frightening group of people, right? If we look at them. But let me give you just a tiny bit of information about each one of these folks. And then I'm going to have you do a little bit of research and get into groups for one of our participations. So Andrea Yates, starting at the top corner. Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in the bathtub, drowned and murdered her 5 children in the bathtub because of postpartum psychosis. She thought they weren't developing properly, so she murdered all of her children in succession and then placed them on the bed that her husband found them when he came home. Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer killed 15 to 17 young men. He cut his victims into pieces. A lot of like really disturbing and frightening events around him. Very famous person related to insanity plea cases. Ed Gein next to him. Ed Gein is the Wisconsin grave robber. He would remove the skin and body parts, sewing them together to create furniture and trophies that he left in his house. Some of your expressions right now are so great. I love it. Next to him, Gacy, the clown killer. John Wayne Gacy, let's see, what can I tell you about him? He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, committed a lot of sodomy, murdering 30 plus boys who were buried in the crawl space beneath his house. Up here on the top right, John Hinckley Jr. tried to assassinate President Reagan to impress the actress Jodie Foster. Wrote her a whole letter trying to impress her by trying to assassinate him. David Berkowitz underneath him over on the right. Berkowitz is the son of Sam Killer in New York, killed 6 victims and wounded several others through shooting. Kenneth Bianchi underneath him. Bianchi was the Hillside Strangler. He kidnapped and sexually assaulted quite a few women. Francine Hughes down here on the bottom set her husband on fire while he was sleeping as a result of physical abuse that she had endured for several years. Next to them, probably the most, one of the more recent, Anissa Ware and Morgan Geyser, 2 12-year-old girls who stabbed another girl 19 times in an attempt to impress the fictional Slender Man character. It was a very recent case. Above them, Gypsy Rose and Nicholas Godejohn, another like kind of a more current one. They stabbed their mother to death, who had abused her for many years, thinking she suffered from all these different illnesses, a lot of Munchausen by proxy related stuff. Couple more, Mark David Chapman down here on the bottom in black and white. He assassinated John Lennon and then remained at the scene reading Catcher in the Rye as he was arrested by the police. Next to him, Lorena Bobbitt, famous for cutting off her husband's penis and then throwing it out the car window. Like, that's a good one. But after years of abuse, she attacked him in the middle of the night with a kitchen knife, surgically removing his penis from his body. It was reattached later. Yep. Surgically you would have said take it. They found it in the forest and surgically reattached it. Lucky guy. You don't want it back. He wanted it back. And he's now a star in quite a few adult sex films. Became famous for it in a way. Ted Kaczynski, 2 more. Kaczynski, the Unabomber, very famous for sending bombs and packages across the United States. And then one last one right here, James Holmes, with the orange hair, known as the Joker Killer. He went into a movie theater in Colorado and shot and killed quite a few people dressed up and pretending to be the Joker during a screening of a Batman movie. So these are some very famous cases where people either pleaded insanity or tried to be considered to be insane in some way as part of their legal proceedings. So what I want you to do, we're going to spend the rest of our day today on this. I want you to get into groups of like 3 to 4 people. I don't want it to be bigger than 4. So like 3 or 4, you could say 2 to 4, whatever's easy for you. And I want you're going to be picking one of these people or groups of people. Now, we're not going to have any repeats, so come up with like a backup in case somebody else picks the one that you really wanted. But what I want you to do is to pick 1 or 2 options. And as soon as you have an idea of who you want, raise your hand. I'll come around with a sheet and I'm going to circle your person. And then I want you in your group to start doing some research on your people, right? So use your phone, use technology if you have it available to you, a computer, whatever. But I want you to look up this person. You're going to get a little bit of information about their background. Tell me a bit about them. Tell me about their life, their background. What crimes did they commit? You don't have to go into exceedingly gruesome detail, but what did they do? Why are we talking about them? And then you're going to describe their legal proceedings and verdicts. What did their trials look like? And I have all that on here. It's all on this page. And as a group, you can write all that down on here if you want, but you are going to be presenting it to the class next time, just from your seats. You're going to be sharing this information. You don't need to all of it. You can decide as a group if one person wants to share it all or if you want to break it up. And you don't even have to get up. You can share it from your seat. But what we'll do is we'll do some research. I'm going to give you the rest of today to do that, just so you don't need to do this as a homework assignment. And then next class, I'll have you as groups. Yeah. Oh, well, I'll come around. I'm glad that you have something you want. Yeah.
This is a little disturbing, but whoever does Casey, just know you might come across these tapes.
Yeah.
You're doing research on them. Do not watch them unless you have like a really, really okay mindset.
Yeah.
Because they are the most disturbing things in the world.
They are really disturbing.
So just keep in mind. They're out there.
Yeah. I went to the Gacy up here. I went to the Museum of Death in San Francisco years ago, and they were playing his tapes. And oh my gosh, yeah, they're quite disturbing. Yeah.
My aunt, it's like when she was younger, she had a family party and it was John Wayne.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But because she was female, nothing
Yeah.
happened, but we have a photo of her.
What? I want to see it. All right. Bring out, you have to email it or bring it. Yeah. Yeah, he was famous he would dress as a clown, Pogo the Clown, and go and do birthday parties, right? For children, which is just frightening. And that's what a small world. That's terrifying. That's really scary. Yeah.
You heard that scene where they plaster out like dead bodies?
No.
Like clothes, like tennis players and shit.
Oh my gosh. No, I have not.
Okay.
That's wild.
Like some museums.
Hold on. I can't hear him. Sorry. Keep going.
Low level.
Yeah.
They pass.
Wow.
From their homes, plastered out and then put in the museum, like writing on it or typing on a typewriter thing.
Wow. That's definitely morbid, right? I mean, there's so many bizarre places like that, right? That sounds creepy. It reminds me you shared that story. James Holmes. I lived in Colorado when this happened. This happened in Colorado. And I went to that movie theater and saw that same Batman movie 4 days before he committed the crime. Terrifying. He did it in Aurora, Colorado at this little movie theater. And my partner and I went and saw that Batman movie in that theater 4 days before it happened. I was just like, I always think about it, just kind of like your story with Gacy. It always comes across my mind whenever I see his picture. I'm like, I missed it by like 4 days. I just feel so lucky, right? That I was before that. But I went to the theater where that happens now, shut down, but it wasn't. So yeah, small world. Sometimes, right? Awfully small. So okay, so go ahead and get into groups. Like again, 2 to 4 people. And when you have somebody you want, let me know and I'll come over.
Yes.
Oh,
Exactly. Exactly.
Like. I like the problem. Oh my God.
Yeah, well, I. There are many cases where psychology.
Oh.
One. We background. Right, the legal. I have a double spaced. That's all. Application. Yeah. Okay. I'll do some research. Sure. Yeah. Sure.
So can I get your attention for just a second and then I'll. Super quickly, so I'm gonna give you the rest of our classroom to work on this. You may not need all that time. Okay, so if you're done, or if you would rather as a group, like go work on it outside or something, I'm completely fine with that. Or you can stay in here, the space is ours for the next half hour. But as soon as you're done or you're feeling good about it as a group, you're welcome to go. Just know that next class, what you'll be turning in is the sheet I gave you with your names on it. You don't have to write anything up, other than you probably want to write notes out for yourself, things that you want to say. So whatever research you do, maybe make it in bullets. Decide as a group who's going to present. If you want to all present together, if you want to divide it up, if you want one person to do it, totally doesn't matter. But take the time that we have left to work on those things. And when you're done or you're feeling good about it, you're welcome to go ahead and go. That's totally fine. Just make sure, if you know you're not going to be your next class, give the sheet to somebody who will be here, right? So that way your group isn't hurting without you. And I'll be here, I'll be floating around if you have questions, but I just wanted to say that whenever you're done or feeling good about it, you're welcome to go. Or if you'd like to go work out in the cold, because it's a beautiful day, you're welcome to. Okay.